On this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, the highs and lows of a weekend with Memphis. First, a gritty comeback performance against the Orlando Magic, then a tough loss to a title contender in Cleveland against the Cavaliers. We're going to talk all that and so much more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. I'm so happy to be with you once again. It is I, Joe Mullinax, flying solo on this edition of the show. No DeMichael Cole today. He will be back with us on tomorrow's episode. So grateful to have you with me over the next 30 minutes or so talking Memphis Grizzlies basketball. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. We are free and available with Locked On Grizzlies anywhere you get podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get our little corner of the internet show here. You can also make sure that you are liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing, doing all those things, and make sure you're also checking out our free daily newsletter, LockedOnDaily.com. Again, that is LockedOnDaily.com. Subscribe to our free daily newsletter and get words on the Memphis Grizzlies from me for free each and every day. An interesting weekend if you're someone that follows the Memphis Grizzlies, or if you're someone that's on social media talking about the Memphis Grizzlies. And we're going to talk more about that later on in the show. Expectations for this team, and not necessarily what they should be, because fandom is in the eye of the beholder, and we'll get to that later on in the show. But first, before I get all philosophical, I do want to actually talk basketball, and we'll start with the more recent contest, the one that happened last night. Memphis going into Cleveland to take on the Cavaliers. Friendly reminder that the Cleveland Cavaliers are one of the very best, if not the very best team in the entire NBA. I usually tip my cap to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Having watched both teams play a decent amount of ball, I think OKC is slightly better, but that would be a heck of a final series if it came to that. Plus, if you are an everydayer of Locked On Grizzlies, you know that I'm a big Ric Flair. To be the man, you've got to beat the man, and the Boston Celtics still exist and are still having a pretty solid season coming off of their NBA Finals win from last year. So I think that there's teams that are in that rarefied air with Cleveland, but you could certainly make an argument that the new look Cavs under Kenny Atkinson are among the best in the league. And there was no Darius Garland for Cleveland in this game. So maybe Grizzlies fans went in thinking that they would be able to take advantage of that absence. Those fans that felt that way probably did not or have not watched much Cleveland Cavalier basketball this season. Because while Garland matters, he's an all-star caliber player, obviously Cleveland being without him hurt them. Ty Jerome exists, right? And Ty Jerome, who played 23 minutes off the bench, arguably the most improved player in the NBA that's not going to win the award, right? Because there's obviously other bigger stars that have made leaps into higher stratospheres of NBA-dom than Ty Jerome. But considering Ty Jerome, former Virginia Cavalier, wahoo wah, was a two-way contract guy, assuming that many looked at Jerome and felt that he would not be able to be a sustainable NBA player, for him to score 26 points on 16 shots, grab 5 rebounds, which is more, by the way, than what Jaren Jackson Jr. grabbed, 3 rebounds. That's a problem, right? We'll talk more about that. But for Ty Jerome to grab 5 rebounds, for Ty Jerome to have 4 assists to only 1 turnover, Desmond Bane, 8 assists to only 1 turnover. That's pretty good. Ja Morant, 10 assists to 1 turnover. Also pretty good. So a pretty good night for the Grizzly Stars in terms of assist to turnover ratio. But for Ty Jerome to outshoot, to outperform the best that the Memphis Grizzlies have to offer, to outscore them, that's a concern. That's a problem. But it's also important to understand that Ty Jerome is not just a most improved player dark horse candidate. He also is a 6th man of the year legitimate candidate for these Cleveland Cavaliers. So Ty Jerome can ball. And it also is important to point out that Donovan Mitchell is a bona fide superstar and has been for some time. 33 points on 23 shots, an efficient night for Mitchell. So Cleveland is very much legit, 27-4 at home. The Grizzlies are now 16-14 on the road after the loss to the Cavaliers. And I mentioned the rebounding issue earlier with Ty Jerome out rebounding Jaren Jackson Jr. It goes deeper than that. Evan Mobley, 13 boards. Jared Allen, 10 boards. Compare that to Zach Edey grabbing 9 rebounds in 25 minutes of play. Santi Aldama grabbing 6. Brandon Clark only grabbing 2. Luke Kennard had 4 rebounds in this contest, 4 of Memphis's 37. Cleveland had 57 rebounds in the game, 22 of which were of the offensive variety. So that tells me that the Cavaliers were able to generate a lot of extra possessions. And again, if you're an everydayer to Locked On Grizzlies, you know how much that infuriates me. Possessions matter. Maybe it's not the same as football, and that is my wheelhouse. But possessions matter. It's one of the reasons the Grizzlies have one of the best offenses in the NBA this season. They are generating more possessions, hence scoring more points. Cleveland got more possessions in this game. Cleveland dominated on the glass. And for the Grizzlies to win, that disparity, a minus 20 rebounding differential, 57-37, that just simply can't happen. It can't. And it starts with Jaren Jackson Jr., and it starts with Zach Edey, but Edey had 9 boards. It's hard to point the finger of blame at Zach in that particular area. Defensively, maybe you have that conversation. Drop coverage is very predictable, and Donovan Mitchell picked him apart in those situations. They were able to certainly take advantage of Edey. Jaren Jackson Jr., not his best output in terms of three-point shooting, 1 for 5 from beyond the arc, but 22 points on 18 shots. It's hard to be too upset with Jaren's productivity in this contest. Plus 3 stocks, 2 steals and a block. John Morant, to be honest with you, I mentioned the 10 assists. He had a double-double, 21 points, 10 assists, only 1 turnover for Ja. 6 of 13 from the field. One of Ja's better games since returning from the injury list. If we want to discuss a star who struggled, it was Desmond Bane. Desmond Bane struggled. 2 of 13 from the field, a disturbingly bad 0 for 7 from 3. If Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane are going to combine to go 1 for 12 from beyond the arc, Memphis is not winning that game. Now, per usual with Des, to his credit, he found other ways to contribute. 8 assists, 5 rebounds. The Grizzlies had 28 assists in this game. This is one of those games where they had more assists than their opponent, almost 30 assists, and they lose. One of the reasons Memphis was able to keep it close, especially in the second half, was that assist mark. But Des shooting that poorly simply is not sustainable. The Grizzlies are not going to be able to win if Bane cannot be more. But if you watch the game, as I did, and I'm sure you caught some of it too, dear listener, dear viewer, Desmond Bane, especially in the second half, was asked to defend Donovan Mitchell and pick him up full court and be that lead defender because Jalen Wells got cooked so mightily by Donovan Mitchell. Jalen Wells struggled immensely. And again, the drop coverage of Zach Edey when he was on the floor did not help matters. But Edey only played 25 minutes. So it's not like Edey was out there all that often. Wells only played 22. Santi Aldama with 29, Luke Kennard with 26, Vince Williams Jr. with 20, and then Brandon Clark played 16. So Taylor Jenkins is condensing that rotation. I know DeMichael's talked about it a little bit. It's been a point of criticism. Jaren had foul trouble. That's why he only played 25 minutes. But John Morant played 34 minutes. Desmond Bane played 35 minutes. The minutes are going up for these Grizzlies. The rotation is condensing some. You'll notice that G.G. Jackson barely played. Only 4 minutes in the game. Scottie Pippen barely played. 5 minutes in the game. Scottie Pippen Jr. Jalen Wells not being able to be what Memphis needed him to be against Donovan Mitchell, and Bane having to carry that burden, plus be that important secondary or tertiary producer of offense. He wasn't able to carry that against a team as quality as the Cleveland Cavaliers. And that all brings us back to reality and how these 2 rookies have been picked on by better teams. Jalen Wells being picked on in this contest, Donovan Mitchell taking him and working him over pretty extensively. And then Zach Edey being picked on a broader scale, right? I'm certainly not going to suggest that Wells has gotten to the same level. Edie has had more so of the picking on with that drop defensive coverage. You have two rookies in the starting lineup. How does Taylor Jenkins address that? Maybe he doesn't. We'll talk about that and more, I'm sure, in the days and weeks to come. But we're going to move on from a loss to a win coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies. A couple days prior on Friday night, the Grizzlies pulled out a nice come-from-behind victory over the Orlando Magic. That's what we're going to talk about next. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When any player scores 50 or more points in a game during the 2024-2025 NBA season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order up to $10 off the next day from noon until midnight. A few ways that you can take advantage of that: a game day feast. You can celebrate ordering wings, pizza, burgers from your favorite spot delivered straight to your door. Or maybe you're like me. Sometimes you stay up late, you're watching a game, playing a game. You just need a midnight snack. You can use Dash Pass to grab something delicious while saving big. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off the order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use the promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. Again, that's noon to midnight the day after the game, and that is exclusive to to Dash Pass members. Go check out DoorDash and become a Dash Pass member if you're not already one. So the Grizzlies lose in Cleveland, but they found a way to win against the Orlando Magic. And I really want to prioritize that found a way to win energy. The Grizzlies were down a considerable amount in this contest. The Grizzlies were able to storm back in the fourth quarter. They really do a phenomenal job picking up the pieces and winning a challenging game. They were down by a lot, and they had a first quarter lead that they squandered, and they battled back in the second half, especially in the fourth quarter, to pick up a hard-fought 105-104 victory. And I do want to stress hard-fought, because just like the Cleveland game where there was chippiness, there was intensity, it was a playoff atmosphere, Orlando, to a lesser extent, has that same vibe. They are 28-30, but do not let the record fool you. They are an impressive team when they are healthy. The Magic have had similar injury issues this year to what the Memphis Grizzlies had to endure last season. Lots of guys banged up, Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, lots of dudes eating minutes on the bench for reasons beyond the control of the franchise. But they are an impressive team, especially on the defensive end of the court. Per Cleaning the Glass, Orlando is the second best defense in the entire National Basketball Association. They do a phenomenal job with their length and their size. They produce and provide all sorts of challenges. And this was especially true for Jaren Jackson Jr. in this game. Jaren was 3 for 13 from the field, so two tough shooting nights, especially from three for Jaren. He was 0 for 6 in the game against Orlando, so really bad weekend shooting the three ball for Triple J. But he did get to the free throw line consistently, 10 of 11 from the charity stripe. That led to his 16 points. Jaren was a non-factor. Ja and Dez did not have the most efficient scoring nights either. And that was one of the more optimistic things for me personally watching this contest. The Grizzlies found a way to win. It's not always going to be pretty, and it's not always going to be the guys that you expect to close out or be productive. We talked about the rookies earlier in the game, or earlier in the show, excuse me. Earlier in this game, it became very clear that it was not going to be Jalen Wells and Zach Edey's night. So what does Taylor Jenkins do? He reduces their minutes. Wells only plays 17 minutes against Orlando. Zach Edey only logs 12 minutes against this Magic team. That means Santi Aldama plays starter minutes. 31 minutes for Santi. He played more than Jaren Jackson Jr. in this contest. You had 22 minutes from Luke Kennard, a very strong 17 minutes from Gigi Jackson, scoring 12 points on 5 shots, hitting 3 threes that really sparked Memphis off the bench. It was a really solid outing for Gigi, as well as Santi, as well as Clark. Clark reminding everyone of just how good he is. And I don't like admitting when I'm wrong. I've done it a couple of times when it comes to Clark. Not that I didn't love Brandon Clark. Way back in 2019, Brandon Clark was my fourth highest rated guy on my draft board. I had Zion Williamson, and anybody who says they didn't have Zion is lying to you, or they didn't understand how basketball worked back then. Zion 1, Joe Morant 2, RJ Barrett 3. Brandon Clark was my fourth ranked guy, and I was very excited. We had a watch party in Memphis back when I worked with SB Nation's Grizzly Bear Blues, and I was very excited. Parker Fleming, Sean Coleman, others that covered the team and worked with our blog at the time was very excited that Brandon Clark came, and he has done such a great job for the Grizzlies over time. But then he blew out his Achilles, right? And so much of his physicality, so much of what he is able to do in terms of leap ability comes from that Achilles tendon. And I was nervous that he was not going to come back the way that Memphis needed him to come back. Well, safe to say he has indeed done just that. He logs a double-double in the game against the Magic, and he has a physical frame. Same with Santi, in a different way that combats what Orlando does relatively well. And that is the good thing about the depth that the Memphis Grizzlies currently have. They have numerous archetypes and numerous types of players that can go out and play and find rhythm and match up against just about every other type of roster in the NBA. Now, every once in a while, there's going to be a game like Cleveland, and you run into a team that's just better than you on that night. But the Oklahoma City Thunder are another example of that. The Orlando Magic are not that. The Magic are a talented team, but they have flaws, and Taylor Jenkins and especially the players were able to take advantage of those flaws. They got to the charity stripe. We mentioned Jaren getting 11 free throws. They were able to, again, create offense for themselves. They did not lose the rebounding battle against the Orlando Magic. They found a way to win that particular struggle. And both the Orlando game and the Cleveland game had the feel of gritty playoff basketball, hard-nosed, tenacious, physical. Those types of games are what the Grizzlies need to experience. This is all about building up opportunity for the postseason ahead, generating experience that the Memphis Grizzlies roster simply does not have. They don't have that experience, certainly not recently. And in the case of several rotation members, Gigi Jackson, who played well against Orlando, Jalen Wells, who was the team's player of the game against Cleveland, despite not being able to defend Donovan Mitchell particularly well. He hit several threes, so credit to Jalen for that. Zach Edey grabbing 9 rebounds against the Cavaliers. All of those guys are 21 years old or younger. They weren't a part of this Grizzlies team the last time they made the playoffs. So there are reasons to be optimistic with this Grizzlies team in terms of getting these opportunities to be in these high-intensity, clutch time scenarios and working through them, whether it's a win or a loss. In the case of Orlando, it was a win. It wasn't the prettiest win. I promise you that John Morant would rather not shoot 10 for 24. Desmond Bane did not have his best offensive weekend. Jaren Jackson Jr. really had issues with the size and length of the Orlando Magic with Wagner and Banchero, Carter Jr. They had so many types of bigger wings and bigs that can switch and do stuff to Jaren in terms of his attempts to get to his left hand on dribble penetration and drives. They can make his life difficult on double teams, creating all sorts of frustrating moments. And that's exactly what happened to Jaren in this game against the Magic. And that's okay. It's okay because his teammates picked him up. And I want to stress that going into our final segment, because I don't want to be accused of not being competitive or not wanting to see the team succeed. Of course, I want to see those things. But for them to go into Orlando and have their 3-star struggle, especially the one all-star they have on the roster right now, and for them to still pull out the win, there's going to be games like that in the postseason where you don't think you should pull out the victory, and you find a way to win, and you scrape it out in the end, and you get the heck out of that arena. And just in case the referees and the analysts and all those folks want to change their mind and try to find a way to let the other team win because they played better. But you found a way. And the more opportunities that the Memphis Grizzlies can have to find a way, the better. Because when they have those moments, when they have those chances to make those kinds of plays, they gain valuable experience that the team simply does not have. And that is something that's important to remember as we go into the rest of this regular season and the playoffs that'll happen beyond it. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to close out this show revisiting expectations and what Memphis Grizzlies fans should realistically look for from these contender Grizzlies. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love the live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether you're hoping for that late-game rally or you want a player to hit a clutch three. You feel like you don't miss a chance to get in on the action. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. Check them out today. All right, so for those of you that follow me on X, at Joe Mullinax, I have a tendency to get fired up from time to time. And especially when I have time, which, with a wife and 3 children, that dwindles as I get older. When I have time, I like to be active on the old social media. And I was active on Sunday evening, as most folks following the Memphis Grizzlies were. And I think that I frustrated some folks when I said the following, okay? Can we just not do the thing where we believe the team is doomed if they lose? And this was back during the third quarter, because this looks like a playoff/finals game. And again, this is in reference to the Cleveland Cavaliers' defeat that the Grizzlies eventually sustained. The team is playing hard now, and it's the third game in 4 nights. Obviously, you would rather that they were winning, but tonight isn't a sky-falling night, in my opinion. Now, of course, there were members of Grizz Nation who disagreed with me and wanted to argue about the sky falling. And I want to stress, this is not going to be me being on a soapbox and talking about the right kinds of fandom for 2 reasons. Number one, you can be whatever kind of freaking fan you want to be, right? It is short for fanatic. My version of Memphis Grizzlies fandom took me down a path where I became a media member. And I sat in on press conferences and covered the team and did all sorts of amazing things, like have weekly radio spots on local Memphis radio stations and talk to players and do stuff that in my wildest dreams I never would have expected. That is my form of fandom. Still being a fan, still being a fanatic. So if your version of fandom is expecting more in terms of your hyper competitiveness, that's not how my competitiveness gets expressed. I'm active in sports still. So as a coach or, when I play, even pick up ball or whatever it is, even in podcasting, I want to be the best podcaster I can be. I don't want to hear that Memphis is a small market and our show's not going to grow. I want to push it. I want our newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com to grow, regardless of how many fans the Memphis Grizzlies have. I'm competitive in ways that I'm directly connected to. I'm not directly connected to the Memphis Grizzlies. John Morant isn't going to listen to this podcast, I'm sure he does, and say, you know what? Joe has a great point. I think that that's going to be the turning of the tide for our organization, is what he just said. So I don't connect that way. But if you do, that's totally cool. And I also want to stress that you can have expectations and you can be critical. Lord knows I have been so critical of this team over the last decade plus. Very critical. Taylor Jenkins' rotations have to get better. John Morant was playing really well in that first half. And then he left the game, not because John chose to, but because Taylor Jenkins kept him on the bench too long. They have to figure that out. How do you get Desmond Bane going when he's having an off shooting night or an off scoring weekend? That is something that the coaches and Bane himself, they need to continue to work through. The 20 rebound advantage for the Cleveland Cavaliers. That makes me angry too. But me ranting and raving about it on a podcast is not going to change how the Grizzlies interact with their schemes and how they crash the glass. That's just my version of fandom. If yours is different, that's cool. All that is to say, this idea of Memphis being a contender. Let's go back to Cleveland. What did the Cleveland Cavaliers do at the trade deadline? They upgraded their rotation. DeAndre Hunter came into the fold. This was a team that was already arguably the best in the NBA. At worst, the third best team in the NBA. And they went out and they made a trade. They got better. What about the Los Angeles Lakers? Did they do any dealings at the trade deadline? A few? Yeah. What about teams like the Dallas Mavericks? Questionable trade, perhaps. But did they make a trade with the eye of championship contention? They did. You might disagree with that, but that was their logic. What about a team like the Denver Nuggets paying so much money to try to build a contending team around Nikola Jokic, who is in his prime? The Memphis Grizzlies are not in their prime. You cannot realistically say that. Desmond Bane is 26 years old. John Morant is 25. Jaren Jackson Jr. is 25. They are entering their primes. Santi Aldama is 24 years old. Zach Edey and Jalen Wells, two starters on an almost nightly basis for the Memphis Grizzlies, are 21 years old. The oldest players on the team are Brandon Clark, Luke Kennard, John Conchar, 28 years old. This is a team that does not have the profile of a contender in the traditional way. Does that mean that they are not contenders? Of course not. They have the top 7-ish offense and the top 7-ish defense per cleaning the glass in the entire National Basketball Association. That is a profile of a contender when using advanced statistics. But the Denver Nuggets have the best player on the planet in Nikola Jokic. The Lakers are pressured each and every year to put out the best possible championship contender they can, forsaking their future. The Cleveland Cavaliers went out and made a trade to make their team better. The Memphis Grizzlies chose to improve the future cap flexibility of their team so they could re-sign the guys that they are developing here. All that is to say, no two forms of contenderdom are the same. The definition of contender for the Memphis Grizzlies is different than that of the Boston Celtics, of the Oklahoma City Thunder. Oklahoma City's younger than Memphis, but the Thunder just have more talent. The Cleveland Cavaliers are a blend of the two, talent, experience. The Grizzlies may not be there, and maybe they are. Maybe they go on a run and they do this amazing thing and they win a championship or just get to the Western Conference Finals. That would be tremendous. My expectations for this team now are what they were at the start of the season, the second round of the playoffs. Because if you get to the second round and you have to face a Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets who spend so much money and have that best player on the planet, to lose to them, would that really surprise you? If the Memphis Grizzlies find a way to get to the Western Conference Finals, do you think they're going to be favored against the Oklahoma City Thunder? And heaven forbid, wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles, they make it happen and get to the NBA Finals. Is it Boston? Is it these Cavaliers? Is it somebody else, the Knicks? Do you think Memphis is going to be favored against any of those teams? The answer almost certainly is no. So have that perspective of the sky falling if you want. If your definition of the sky falling is they're not a true title contender by your definition. To me, they're a title contender. But they're at the bottom of that tier. And a lot of things have to go right for them to actually achieve that. Does that make this season a failure? Absolutely not. Because they have chosen and they are structured to keep this team together and compete for years to come. And you hope that upward trajectory, as long as health allows it, continues. That is what my expectations are for the remainder of the season. If they go beyond them, that's fantastic. Let me know what you guys are thinking in the comments. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Try to be nice. I had a rough night there on Sunday evening. Thank you so much for being with me on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. It is much appreciated. The next time we are together, it will be the Tuesday episode of the show. Michael Cole will be back with me. Very excited about that. Memphis about to kick off a 5-game homestand. They have not been in the friendly confines of FedEx Forum for a long time. They take on Kevin Durant and the Phoenix Suns on Tuesday evening. DeMichael and I will preview that game and talk so much more about Memphis Grizzlies basketball on our next show. I hope you'll be with us. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. Be an everydayer. Make DeMichael and I a part of your Memphis Grizzlies and NBA content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. And also make sure that you are subscribing to Locked On Daily, free daily newsletter, lockedondaily.com. Again, lockedondaily.com. Words from me on the Memphis Grizzlies, plus NBA analysis, fantasy basketball advice, and so much more. Make sure you're checking out lockedondaily.com. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I am Joe Mullinax. We'll catch you next time here on Locked On Grizzlies. Choose the darker side if you want, but I'm going to be on the sunny side. Looking forward to the next game of Grizzlies basketball.